Oh hey, there are lots of actors who are multi-talented nowadays. We're talking about actors who do their own stunts, write, produce, and direct the films that they star in. But have you ever heard of actors who did their own makeup? Now that's not something you hear nowadays. Well, one actor did just that a long time ago. But this man's makeup wasn't simple. His ability to transform himself into these tortured, grotesque characters made him an inspirational figure in makeup, even today, giving him the nickname of the Man of 1,000 Faces. This is the story of Lon Chaney.
Lon Chaney was born Leonidas Frank Chaney on the 1st of April 1883 in Colorado Springs. His maternal grandfather founded what is now the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind, where both of his parents met. Both of his parents were deaf. Because he grew up in a silent household, he didn't speak for the first few years of his life. At the age of 9, his life at school ended when he had to take care of his mother, who fell ill at the time. What was worse for her though is that she eventually couldn't use her hands for sign language. However, some have argued that this silent household was a training ground for what was to come later in his life. In 1902, Lon joined his older brother at the Opera House, who was a stagehead. This was where his acting career began. He became very skilled in pantomime.
Going back to this idea that Lon's silent household was a training ground, since sign language is speechless, you communicate through body movements and facial expressions. And of course, pantomime is a performing art with pretty much no speech. So Lon fitted in really well, to say the least. He began travelling the Midwest with popular vaudeville and theatre acts.
In 1905, he met the singer Frances Cleveland at an audition who was 15 at the time. Lon was teaching her how to dance, and eventually he married her when she turned 16, and she changed her name to Cleaver Chaney. A year later, they had a son together called Creighton.
The baby was born prematurely at 7 months. At first he was unresponsive, so Lon took his son out of the nurse's hands and went outside on a very cold February day in Oklahoma. He thawed through some ice in a frozen lake, baking a hole. He dipped his unresponsive son into the freezing water, lifted him back up, and brought him to life.
After the baby was strong enough, he went back to stage work for not only acting, but choreographing, wardrobe supervising, and stage manager. When the act settled in California in 1910, Cleaver took some singing jobs at a cabaret, which at one point made her more popular than Lon. The marriage had some troubles. With the cabaret crowd came drinks with well-dressed men. Supposedly, this developed into a drinking problem, while at the same time, Lon was giving dancing lessons and working with other women. Sometime in 1913, there was an argument on who would look after Creighton during a time of managing the Colb & Dill show. Eventually, after Cleaver finished her performance, she walked into the Majestic Theatre where Lon was working, went up to the wings and swallowed mercuric chloride in a suicide attempt. She survived, but it ruined her singing career. They separated and divorced in May of that year, and never saw her again. The ensuing scandal from the events forced Lon out of the theatre and into the film industry. His first films were made in Notre Studios, which was actually the first permanent film studio in Hollywood. Sometime later, it was merged with Universal. Chaney at first played extras before eventually getting bigger roles. Universal later opened Universal City, which was a much bigger studio. Among all the hundreds of actors trying to get work, Chaney stood out for his skills in makeup. He had his makeup photographed to determine what worked and what didn't. In some cases he was recognizable, but others weren't as easy.
What's important to note here was that when he was testing makeup, it wasn't simply to know what would look convincing, but rather what would look convincing on film. And obviously I'm not talking about 4K color film here, I'm talking about lesser quality black and white celluloid. There were more things you could get away with.
For example, with wrinkles, I suppose you can blacken the inside so they stand out more and at most make them look thicker. He befriended husband and wife director team Joe DeGrasse and Ida Mae Park, who gave him bigger roles in their films, as well as encouraged him to play more bizarre characters. Together they made a lot of films throughout the mid to late 1910s. He also married former Colb & Dill colleague Hazel Hastings. Together they managed to gain custody of his son, who was in various homes and boarding schools since the last divorce.
Everything was going well for Chaney. However, he was relatively underpaid despite his skills. He asked for a raise but was turned down, being told he'll never be worth more than $100 a week. He left Universal but struggled for a while to gain employment. Eventually, William S. Hart, who was a popular actor at the time, gave Chaney an important role in his next film, Riddle Gone. It was at this point when Chaney's talents were recognized in the industry.
However, Chaney's breakthrough performance came in 1919 with The Miracle Man, playing a contortionist. Originally, the director wanted a real contortionist, but none of them could act. When Chaney test acted, his performance was so convincing that the director was supposedly shaken. It was one of the highest grossing films of 1919 and helped launch Chaney's career to new heights. One of the next films that demonstrated his ability to transform himself would be The Penalty in 1920. In this film, he plays a crime boss with both legs amputated.
To perform as a bilateral amputee, he strapped his legs behind him and then fitted his bent up legs into some leather stomps. Because this was the first of its kind without any real safety precautions, needless to say, this was very painful. A common thing to occur in the more extreme makeup. He could walk in those stomps for only 10 to 20 minutes at a time. With The Penalty and another film called Treasure Island, he secured his place as one of Hollywood's most famous character actors. Chaney would go on to star in the 1923 adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, playing Quasimodo. At that time, it was Chaney's most extreme makeover. On the breastplate area, he had robes he bent over to tie himself with, and by doing so, it would force him to maintain his hunchback posture.
The hump was made out of plaster, which would be attached to a harness that was worn on his back. Nose putty was put on the tip of his nose. Cheekbones were made with cotton and collodion method. Fake eyebrows were on top of his real eyebrows. And added on top of that were the wig and false teeth. To add to his unsettling appearance was the use of his tongue, which he sticks out frequently.
Chaney went even further with transformations in the first English adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera in 1925, playing the Phantom. The first notable feature would be his up-tilted nose. He used a strip of hard fish skin, glued it down with spirit gum, ran it up to underneath his skull cap, and then held it down with adhesive tape to maintain that nose position. His skull cap was also raised to increase the size of his forehead as well.
His ears were glued back. His eye sockets were painted black with white highlights added underneath the eyes, false teeth, and the rest was highlights and shadows of the makeup that made it effective. The next notable film that demonstrated his makeup skills was London After Midnight in 1927. The most notable feature was his mouth and eyes. The mouth consisted of a full set of sharp teeth. The upper portion had wires that would hold the corners of his mouth open to give him that constant grin. These also apparently hurt a lot and can only use for a few minutes at a time. His eyes were fitted with thin wires that would go around his eye sockets to give his eyes a more open and garish stare to them.
Not only could he change his physical appearance, but his race as well. He played a few Asians because at that time, anything was possible. An example would be Shadows from 1922. Just some trivia, it's adapted from the famous short story of, get ready, Ching Ching Chinaman. Yeah, now you know.
When it comes to Asian makeup in general, Chaney used library mending tissue to draw back the corners of his eyes, which gives them the slant. To further highlight the slant, light black lines are drawn on the inner and outer corners of his eyes. I couldn't see this in Shadows, but perhaps in another film I'll get to in a second. Of course, with a stereotypical Asian look comes the teeth that stick out more from the mouth. To make this kind of teeth, or any kind of false teeth in general, he fitted dental rubber over the natural teeth, carved the shape required for the character, and then painted them with tooth enamel.
In Mr. Wu in 1927, he played two Chinese characters, Mr. Wu and Grandfather Wu. Now, dual roles wasn't anything new, he's done this as far back as 1917. Now, Grandfather Wu definitely had the more transformed look here. One notable feature of Chaney's face is his strong jawline. When playing the frail grandfather, he managed to hide it, but it's not some advanced technique as you might think. The hood Grandfather Wu was wearing was simply moved forward, hiding his jawline.
It might sound too simple, but when you look at the contrasting colours of his light skin and dark hood in the black and white film, it creates the illusion that his facial width ends at what the viewer sees. You wouldn't think there's more width to his face underneath the hood. Because of this illusion, his face looks way more thinner.
Of course, with the 30s approaching and the introduction of sound film, actors needed a smooth transition to sound. You'd be surprised that some actors don't transition well and end up retiring in the early 30s. Chaney was obviously a very physically and visually expressive actor. Cool and all for silent film, but obviously, for sound, you need to use your voice. The sound of your voice was a make or break moment for actors at that time. So, how was the transition to sound film for Chaney? Well, he only starred in one sound film, but there is a reason for that.
It was a sound remake of a 1925 film Chaney starred in, The Unholy Three in 1930.
Now, folks, if you'll just gather around a little closer now. Come right in a little closer. That's it. That's fine, folks. Now, then, if you'll be real quiet, I'll see if I can get the little boy to say something. Well, how are you today, Tommy? Oh, I'm feeling fine, thank you.
Despite him credited for playing 2 characters with one being in disguise, he actually had 5 voices in the film, and he even signed a statement declaring it was his voice. These were Echo the ventriloquist as well as his dummy, the old woman in disguise, a parrot, and a girl. But I don't know which one.
It's quite clear that his voice was versatile, and his career in sound would have been a great success. So, what happened?
A year before, he starred in Thunder. Filming locations included a cold and snowy Green Bay, Wisconsin. On location, Chaney caught a cold. Unfortunately, that cold developed into pneumonia. By late 1929, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. To make matters worse, during filming, artificial snow was lodged in his throat, leading to infection. So despite the diagnosis, he carried on and acted in The Unholy Three.
Despite aggressive treatment, his condition worsened, and unfortunately he died 1 month after the release of The Unholy Three, on the 26th of August 1930, at the age of only 47. He was still remembered decades after. In 1957, his life was made into a biopic known as Man of a Thousand Faces, starring James Cagney as Chaney. Despite discouraging his son from entering show business, Creighton went on to become an actor, eventually adopting the stage name of Lon Chaney Jr. He didn't do his own makeup, but he was a well-known horror actor in the 1940s.
Several makeup artists and actors, whether character, creature, or regular, admired his work and learned a lot from him. Unfortunately, most of his films are considered lost, with London After Midnight being one of the most sought-after lost films that was destroyed in the 1965 MGM Vault Fire. In 1929, he built a stone cabin in the wilderness of Sierra Nevada as a mountain retreat. It still stands today, but it's not open to the public. Finally, his famous makeup case was donated to the Los Angeles County Museum.
Much like the other old stars I make videos on, I'm always intrigued by their unique traits and events that happen to them in their lives. I chose to make a video on Chaney because I was intrigued by his amazing makeup skills. Like I said at the start, it's not something you hear nowadays. Of course, makeup is only scratching the surface of this man's skills. His expressive body from all that previous acting in pantomime definitely helped his status as a character actor. It's stars like Chaney that make me appreciate multi-talented people. Like I said, nowadays there are plenty of actors who not only acted but have directed, produced and written their own works, given true creative freedom without any studio interference. Chaney was given a lot of freedom in the makeup department. He even tried directing and screenwriting in the 1910s, but unfortunately wasn't allowed to carry out his ideas. But despite that, it was revealed long after that Chaney had a lot of uncredited involvement in many of his works anyways. I think there's one thing we can take from this man's story. Now, Chaney may have been an actor, but his skill in makeup is what made him stand out. Now, you may be skilled in a certain field, but try and learn another skill within the same field. It can make you stand out more as a person and give you that sense of individuality that we all want. And with that being said, I'm out of here.
Lon Chaney attains immortality, said a Screen magazine at the time. No man in pictures, nor woman either, has won the wide space in the popular heart that Chaney could call his own. There never was an actor whose every gesture carried more feeling, more eloquence than Chaney. He will be missed not only by the producers, but by the millions who took him into their hearts.